My sister-in-law went completely unhinged when she found out that I am dating again after her sister died because she thinks that she should be next in line. I was married to my wife Celia for 7 years before she passed away from cancer. We fought the disease together for 18 months. I held her hand through chemotherapy. I slept in hospital chairs for weeks at a time. I watched the woman I loved fade away until there was nothing left to hold on to. When she died, part of me died with her. I didn't think I would ever feel whole again. Celia's family became my family during our marriage. Her parents treated me like a son. Her younger sister Ren treated me like a brother. We spent holidays together and celebrated milestones together and supported each other through the hardest moments of losing Celia. I thought we were bonded by shared grief and genuine love for the person we all lost. I was wrong about Ren. The first 2 years after Celia's death, I wasn't interested in dating. I focused on surviving each day and slowly rebuilding a life that felt worth living. I went to therapy. I reconnected with old friends. I threw myself into work. I visited Celia's grave every Sunday and talked to her like she could still hear me. I wasn't ready to move on and nobody expected me to be. Ren was especially supportive during this time. She checked on me constantly. She brought me food when I forgot to eat. She came over to watch movies when my apartment felt too quiet. She listened when I needed to talk about Celia and sat with me when I couldn't talk at all. I thought she was being a good sister-in-law. I thought she missed Celia as much as I did and we were helping each other heal. Around the 2.5-year mark, I started feeling ready to meet someone new. Not to replace Celia, but to build something different. My therapist said this was healthy and normal. My friends encouraged me to try dating apps. I went on a few awkward first dates that didn't lead anywhere. Then I met Josie at a bookstore and something clicked. Josie was kind and patient and understood that I came with baggage. She didn't try to compete with Celia's memory or pretend my past didn't exist. She just wanted to be part of my future. We dated for 3 months before I told anyone in Celia's family. I wanted to make sure it was real before having difficult conversations. When I finally told Celia's parents, they were happy for me. Her mother cried and said Celia would have wanted me to find love again. Her father shook my hand and said I deserved happiness. They asked to meet Josie and welcomed her warmly when I brought her to dinner. Ren had a very different reaction. She asked if I was really ready to disrespect her sister's memory like this. I told her dating someone new wasn't disrespecting Celia. I told her I would always love Celia, but I couldn't spend the rest of my life alone. I told her this was healthy, and her own parents supported my decision. Ren said her parents didn't understand. She said they were too eager to move on from their own daughter. She said I was supposed to be different. She said she thought I truly loved Celia. I said I did love Celia. Ren said if I really loved her, I wouldn't be able to look at another woman. She said Celia deserved better than a husband who replaced her so quickly. She said 2.5 years wasn't nearly long enough to grieve a marriage of 7 years. She said I should be ashamed. Then she said something that changed everything. She said she had been waiting. She said she thought eventually I would see what was right in front of me. She spent 2 years pretending to be supportive while actually positioning herself to be my next partner. She was angry not because I was dating too soon, but because I was dating someone who wasn't her. I told Ren, she said all those nights watching movies together meant something. She said she could wait a little longer if I needed time to figure out how to handle this situation without destroying an entire family. I told Celia's parents the truth. I sat them down and explained what Ren confessed to me. I told them I never saw Ren as anything but a sister. I told them her expectations were not based in any reality I participated in. I told them I was deeply uncomfortable with the idea that she viewed her sister's death as her chance to be with me. Her parents were horrified. They sat me down separately after Ren left and apologized for not seeing what was happening. Her mother kept saying she should have noticed something was off about how much time Ren spent with me. Her father looked exhausted and said they would talk to Ren about getting help, but they understood if I needed space from family gatherings for a while. I drove home in a daze and sat in my car outside my apartment for 20 minutes before I could move. She had keys to my apartment because I gave them to her during the worst days after Celia died, when I couldn't take care of myself. I got out of bed and changed the locks right then. The next day I went to work but couldn't focus on anything. My boss asked if I was okay and I said I had some family stuff going on. I left early and went home and just sat on my couch staring at the wall. Josie texted asking if I wanted to grab dinner, and I realized I had to tell her what happened. If Ren was going to escalate this situation, Josie needed to know. I explained about Ren's confession and how she thought we were building toward a relationship. I told her about the decade of hidden feelings and how Ren saw Celia's illness as her opportunity. I watched Josie's face carefully while I talked, looking for signs that this was too much drama and she was going to run. She listened without interrupting, and when I finished, she was quiet for a minute. Then she asked how I felt about it. Not what I was going to do or whether Ren was right about anything, but how I felt. I said I felt betrayed and disgusted and angry that someone used my grief that way. She nodded and said that made sense. She asked what I wanted to happen next, and I said I wanted clear boundaries with Ren and to protect what we were building together. Josie reached across the table and took my hand. She said she was concerned about Ren's intensity because it sounded like more than just unrequited feelings. She said it sounded like Ren had built an entire fantasy relationship in her head and was now upset that reality didn't match. She asked if I thought Ren would respect boundaries or if this might get worse. I admitted I didn't know, but I was worried about it escalating. She suggested I start documenting everything. Screenshot any texts or emails from Ren. In the morning, I called my therapist Gareth and asked if he had any emergency appointments. He said he could fit me in that afternoon, and I spent the rest of the morning at work trying to focus, but mostly just counting down the hours. I showed up at Gareth's office. He listened and took notes, and when I finished, he said what Ren did was a fundamental betrayal of trust. He said viewing her sister's illness as a romantic opportunity revealed some concerning thought patterns that weren't my responsibility to fix. I asked if I should have noticed her feelings earlier, and Gareth reminded me that Ren deliberately hid them. He said she spent years deceiving everyone, including herself, about her motivations. He said her confession wasn't my fault, and I shouldn't carry guilt about not seeing something she worked hard to conceal. That helped. But I still felt angry about all those nights I thought we were supporting each other, when really she was positioning herself. Gareth and I talked through concrete steps for setting boundaries. He said I needed to be clear and direct with Ren about having no romantic interest. He said I should limit contact to necessary family events only, and have other people present when I did see her. He said it said we should talk again because she felt like I didn't really hear her out. She said she understood I was surprised, but we needed to discuss this properly. I stared at the message and felt my stomach turn. She still thought there was something to discuss. She still thought I might come around to her way of seeing things. I didn't respond right away. Instead, I took a screenshot like Josie suggested and saved it to a folder on my phone. I created a document on my computer and started logging every interaction with Ren from the past week. The confession at her parents' house, the text message, everything I could remember about what she said and when. It felt paranoid but also necessary. I told her I wasn't trying to cut Ren out of my life completely, but I needed her to understand that we would only ever be family, nothing more. Her mother said she understood, and they would make sure Ren got that message. The first one said she missed talking to me and hoped I was doing okay. The second one said she knew I needed time, but she wanted me to know she was here whenever I was ready. The third one said we needed to have a proper conversation about our future together because she had been patient long enough. That last message made my skin crawl. The presumption that we had a future together. The idea that she had been patient, like she was doing me a favor by waiting. I finally responded with a clear message. I said I appreciated her support over the past 2 years, but I needed her to understand that I had never had romantic feelings for her. I said I viewed her as a sister, and that would never change. I said I was building a life with Josie, and I needed Ren to respect that and respect my boundaries going forward. I said we could be family at holidays and events, but nothing beyond that. I hit send and immediately felt anxious about how she would react. Within 5 minutes, my phone started ringing. It was Ren. I stared at her name on the screen and let it go to voicemail. I wasn't ready for a live conversation where she could argue or cry or try to convince me of something. I needed her to hear my boundaries without being able to push back in real time. She left a message. I waited an hour before listening to it. Her voice was tearful and confused. She said she didn't understand why I was being so cruel when she finally had the courage to be honest about her feelings. She said she thought I cared about her. She said all those nights together had to mean something. She said I was throwing away something real for someone I barely knew. She said she would wait for me to come to my senses, but she hoped it wouldn't take too long because she had already waited so many years. I saved the voicemail and I felt something release in my chest hearing him say these things. I had been carrying guilt about hurting Ren's feelings even though I knew I did nothing wrong. Lowell's anger on my behalf helped me see the situation more clearly. He pointed out that Ren essentially admitted to using my grief as he said normal people don't wait for their sister to die, so they can make a move on her husband. He asked if I understood how disturbing her timeline was. I nodded and felt my resolve strengthen. Lowell said I needed to protect myself and Josie from whatever Ren might do next. He said people who build these kinds of fantasies don't usually let them go easily. He said I should document everything and keep Celia's parents informed. He offered to we went to a small Italian restaurant we had been wanting to try. Josie ordered pasta and I got chicken. We talked about her work and a project she was excited about. I told her about a book I was reading. She shared a funny story about her roommate's cat. I asked about her childhood and she told me about growing up in a small town. We split a dessert and argued playfully about whether chocolate or vanilla was better. Walking back to the car, she took my hand and smiled at me. I realized this was what I needed to remember. My life was moving forward. I was building something real with someone who cared about me. The situation with Ren was painful and complicated, but it didn't define my entire existence. I had a future that was separate from that drama. Josie squeezed my hand and asked if I wanted. I reminded her that I told her I didn't have romantic feelings for her, and that wasn't going to change. She raised her voice and said she drove all the way here, and the least unannounced by giving her access to my space. She started crying. I could hear her voice break as she said she had been patient for over a decade. She said she couldn't believe I was choosing someone I barely knew. I spoke clearly through the door and said that was exactly the problem. She didn't understand me at all if she thought I could ever see her romantically. I said she was rewriting normal family affection into something it never was. I said I needed her to leave and respect my boundaries. She kept crying and said I waited another 5 minutes before checking the peephole to make sure she was really gone. I called Celia's parents as soon as I was sure Ren had left. Her father answered and I told him what just happened. I explained that Ren showed up at my apartment unannounced and refused to leave when I asked her to. He said they were going to have a very serious conversation with Ren about harassment and consequences. He asked if I felt unsafe and if I needed anything. I said I was okay, but I wanted them to know what was happening. Her mother got on the phone and apologized. She said they were horrified by how Ren was acting. She said they raised her better than this and they didn't understand where this obsession came from. I thanked them for their support and said I hoped they could get through to her. Her father said if Ren continued to violate, she described movie nights where we sat close on the couch. She mentioned late conversations where I opened up about my feelings. She said she remembered exactly what I was wearing the first time we met. She described looks we exchanged that she interpreted as meaningful. She said she knew I felt the connection too, even if I was too scared to admit it. Reading her words made me feel sick and violated. She was taking normal family interactions and turning them into evidence of a romance that never existed. Every supportive gesture I made, I saved the email and added it to the folder where I was keeping all her messages. Then I closed my laptop and tried to calm down. My hands were shaking and I felt I had a therapy session scheduled with Gareth for Tuesday. I brought my laptop and showed him Ren's email. He read it carefully and then looked at me with concern. He said what Ren was doing went beyond simple, unrequited feelings. He said she was creating an alternate narrative that erased Celia and my grief entirely. He said in her version of events, my mourning became a courtship and my vulnerability became romantic overtures. He asked how that made me feel. I said it made me feel violated and angry. I said she was taking the worst period of my life, and he reminded me that having mental health struggles or unrequited feelings doesn't excuse harmful behavior. He said I had every right to be angry about having my experience distorted and my boundaries violated. We spent the rest of the session working on strategy. Josie had been texting with her about the whole situation because she needed support too. Elena wanted to meet me and hear the story directly. We all had dinner together at Josie's apartment. Elena was blunt and direct in a way I appreciated. She said Ren's behavior was stalker behavior disguised as family loyalty. She said the fact that Ren hid her feelings for over a decade and then expected me to reciprocate after her sister died showed a complete disconnect from reality. She said normal people don't build secret romantic fantasies around their sister's spouse and then get angry when those fantasies aren't reciprocated. She asked if I had considered getting a restraining order. I said I hoped it wouldn't come to that, but I was documenting everything just in case. Elena said that was smart. She told Josie she was proud of her for handling such a complicated situation with grace. She said not every girlfriend would be willing to deal with this level of family drama. Josie said she believed in our relationship, and she wasn't going to let someone else's inappropriate behavior destroy what we were building. I felt grateful for both of them and their clear perspective on the situation. I decided I needed to send Ren one final message that left no room for misinterpretation. I opened my email and started typing. I wrote that I would not be having any further direct communication with her. I said all future contact should go through her parents if absolutely necessary for family logistics. I said my boundaries were firm and not open to negotiation. I said I wished her well, but I needed her to respect my decision and leave me alone. I said continuing to contact me after this message would be harassment, and I would take appropriate steps to protect myself. I reread the email 3 times to make sure the language was clear and firm. Then I hit send and felt a wave of relief wash over me. I had drawn a clear line. Whatever happened next was on Ren. I had done everything I could to be direct and honest about my feelings and my boundaries. I closed my laptop and called Josie to tell her I had sent the final message. She said she was proud of me for being so clear. I said I hoped this would be the end of it, but I wasn't sure. She said whatever happened, we would handle it together. I believed her and felt more prepared to face whatever came next. I opened my email the next morning and saw Ren's response sitting in my inbox. The subject line just said, "Really?" And I felt my stomach drop before I even clicked it. The message started sad, talking about how she couldn't believe I was throwing away everything we built together. Then it shifted. She said I must have known how she felt all those years. She said I wasted her time by letting her believe we had a future. She said I was being cruel on purpose by pretending I never noticed her feelings. She said she gave me the best years of her life waiting for me to see what was right in front of me. She said I led her on through every movie night and every conversation and every hug goodbye. She said I owed her an explanation for why I chose a stranger over someone who actually loved me. I read the email 3 times trying to understand how she had convinced herself I knew about her feelings when I genuinely had no idea. I forwarded it to Celia's parents without responding because I didn't trust myself to stay calm. The next day, Josie called me sounding upset. She said she got a weird Facebook message and needed to show me. I drove to her apartment and she pulled up the message on her phone. Ren had introduced herself as Celia's sister and said she wanted to meet for coffee to discuss some concerns about me. The message was polite and friendly, but I could see the manipulation underneath. Ren was trying to go around my boundaries by contacting Josie directly. Josie had already taken screenshots before I even got there. She asked if I thought Ren was dangerous, and I said I didn't know anymore. Josie wrote back a careful response saying she appreciated the introduction, but that any concerns about me should be discussed with me directly. She hit send and we both watched her phone. Ren replied almost instantly with a long message about how I wasn't over Celia yet. She said I was using Josie to avoid dealing with my grief. She said Josie deserved to know the truth about who I really was. She said she cared about both of us too much to watch me make this mistake. She said as Celia's sister, she had a responsibility to protect her memory. Josie's hands were shaking as she read it. I grabbed my phone and called Celia's parents right away. Her mother answered and I told her about the Facebook message. She sighed and said they had been arguing with Ren every single day about her behavior. She said Ren wouldn't listen to anything they said. She said they were running out of ways to get through to her. Her father got on the phone and asked if I would be willing to meet with all of them together. He said maybe if they were all in the same room, they could have a real conversation about boundaries. I told him I wasn't sure that was a good idea. He said he understood, but he thought it might help if Ren could hear from all of us at once that her behavior needed to stop. I said I needed to think about it and talk to Gareth. I called Gareth that afternoon and explained the situation. He asked what I hoped to accomplish with a family meeting. I said I didn't know, but Celia's parents seemed desperate for a solution. Gareth said it might provide closure if I had Celia's parents backing me up in person. He said it could make the boundaries feel more real to Ren if her own parents were enforcing them. He said as long as I went in with clear expectations and didn't let anyone pressure me to compromise, it might be worth trying. I called Celia's father back and said I would do the meeting, but only at their house, and only if everyone understood I was there to reinforce boundaries, not negotiate them. He agreed immediately and said they could do it the following Sunday. I spent the whole week feeling sick about the confrontation. Josie offered to come with me for support. I told her I appreciated it, but this needed to be just family. She said she understood but made me promise to call her right after. We had dinner the night before the meeting and she helped me practice what I wanted to say. She kept reminding me to stay calm and clear. She said not to let Ren twist my words or make me feel guilty. She said to remember that I had done nothing wrong. Sunday morning, I drove to Celia's parents' house with my stomach in knots. Ren's car was already in the driveway when I pulled up. I sat in my car for a minute trying to steady my breathing. Then I walked up to the door, and Celia's mother let me in. Ren was sitting on the couch looking hopeful. She smiled at me like this was going to fix everything. Celia's father sat down in his chair and said they were there because Ren's behavior had become unacceptable and needed to stop immediately. Ren tried to interrupt, but her mother held up her hand and told her to listen first. I looked at Ren and said I had never had romantic feelings for her. I said I only ever saw her as a sister. I said her confession made me deeply uncomfortable about our entire relationship. I said all the time we spent together after Celia died was about shared grief, not romance. Ren shook her head and said, I must have felt something because of how close we became. She said normal people don't spend that much time together unless they're building towards something. I had to explain that closeness born from shared grief is not romantic intimacy. I said we were both missing Celia, and that's what connected us. Celia's mother spoke up and said she could see now that Ren had misinterpreted normal family affection as something more. I looked straight at Ren and told her that hearing she viewed Celia's illness as an opportunity made me sick. I said it disturbed me so deeply that I couldn't stop questioning whether anything she did for me during those 2 years was real. She started crying immediately and said of course she loved her sister. I told her that real love doesn't include hoping someone dies so you can date their husband. She shook her head and insisted it wasn't like that. I said it was exactly like that based on her own words. She tried to explain that she felt guilty about having those feelings. I cut her off and said feeling guilty didn't change what she admitted. Her tears got heavier, but I didn't back down. Celia's father cleared his throat and said they needed to establish clear rules going forward. He looked at Ren and listed them out slowly. No more showing up at my apartment without being invited. No contact with Josie under any circumstances. No telling family members twisted versions of what happened between us. Communication with me only when absolutely necessary at holidays or family events. Ren's face went red and she asked if they were seriously taking my side over hers. Her mother said this wasn't about sides. She said they were protecting everyone, including Ren herself, from making this situation worse. Ren stood up fast and said they were choosing a stranger over their own daughter. Celia's father said they were choosing what was right and healthy for their family. The meeting fell apart quickly after that. Ren grabbed her purse and headed for the door. She turned back and said we would all regret choosing Josie over family. She said she was the only one who really cared about keeping Celia's memory alive. Then she walked out and slammed the door hard enough to rattle the windows. Celia's parents sat there looking exhausted. Her mother apologized to me and said they would keep working with Ren, but they understood if I needed distance from family gatherings for a while. I told them I appreciated everything they did today. Celia's father walked me to the door and shook my hand. He said they meant what they said about the boundaries, and they would enforce them. I drove straight to Josie's apartment feeling completely drained. She opened the door and took one look at my face and pulled me inside. I sat on her couch and she held me while I told her everything that happened. She didn't say much, just listened and rubbed my back. After I finished talking, she said she was proud of me for standing firm. I felt validated that Celia's parents saw the situation clearly and backed me up. The confrontation was awful, but at least now everyone knew where things stood. Josie made us dinner and we watched a movie without really paying attention to it. I just needed to be near someone who made me feel safe. Over the next week, Ren didn't text or call me directly. Celia's mother called on Thursday and said Ren was telling extended family members that I was being cruel and unreasonable. Apparently, she left out the part about her confession and made it sound like I was cutting her off for no reason. Cousins and aunts who didn't know the full story started sending me concerned messages. They asked what happened and why I was being so harsh with Ren. One aunt said Ren was devastated and couldn't understand why I turned on her. Another cousin said family should stick together during hard times. The messages made me frustrated because Ren was painting herself as the victim. I talked to Gareth about it in our next session. He said getting into arguments with every family member would be exhausting and probably wouldn't help. He suggested I send one clear message to Celia's parents, giving them permission to share the truth with anyone who asked. That way I wouldn't have to defend myself repeatedly to people who only heard Ren's version. I called Celia's father that evening and told him he and his wife could tell family members what really happened. I said they could explain about Ren's inappropriate feelings and why I had to set boundaries. He thanked me for trusting them to handle it. Celia's mother sent a family-wide email 2 days later. She explained that Ren had developed romantic feelings for me that weren't returned. She said they supported my decision to establish boundaries and asked family members to respect our privacy. She kept it brief but clear. The concerned messages stopped almost immediately. A few family members reached out privately to apologize for not understanding the situation. One cousin said she felt terrible for questioning my decisions without knowing the facts. An uncle said he was sorry Ren put me in such an uncomfortable position. Their support meant more than I expected. Josie and I had been dating for 5 months by this point. Our relationship grew stronger through handling this crisis together. She never complained about the drama or made me feel like I was too much trouble. She proved herself patient and trustworthy in ways that mattered. She genuinely cared about my well-being instead of just the idea of being with me. We had real conversations about hard topics, and she never tried to minimize what I was dealing with. I started to see a future with her that felt solid and real. I decided to introduce Josie to some of my friends from before Celia. These were people who knew me in college and early in my career. They weren't connected to my grief or my marriage. We met up at a bar downtown on Saturday night. My friend John Ray shook Josie's hand and immediately started telling embarrassing stories about me from our college days. My friend Rachel hugged Josie and said she was glad to finally meet her. The conversation flowed easily, and Josie fit right in with the group. She laughed at their jokes and asked questions about our shared history. Later that week, John Ray texted me that Josie seemed great and that I seemed more like my old self around her. Rachel said the same thing when she called. Their approval felt good because these were people who knew me before everything got complicated. On what would have been Celia's birthday, I woke up to an email from Ren. The subject line just said her name. I opened it and read through the whole thing with my stomach tight. Ren wrote that she was the only one who truly understood my grief because she lost Celia too. She said I was dishonoring Celia's memory by moving on so quickly with someone who never knew her. She said Celia deserved better than to be forgotten and replaced. She said if I really loved my wife, I would still be mourning instead of playing house with a stranger. The email made me angry, but I didn't respond. Instead, I forwarded it to Celia's parents so they could see that Ren was still contacting me despite their agreement. Her father called me an hour later and said he would handle it. His voice came through the phone 2 hours later, tired and frustrated in equal measure. He said he'd just gotten off a call with Ren that lasted 40 minutes and went nowhere good. She refused to accept that her behavior counted as harassment and kept insisting she was just expressing her feelings. He told her that expressing feelings becomes harassment when the other person has clearly said no and asked for distance. She argued that I never actually said no, that I just needed more time to process my emotions. He had to spell out that my relationship with Josie was itself a clear no, that dating someone else meant I wasn't interested in her. Ren said Josie was a mistake I would realize soon enough. He said that kind of thinking was exactly why they were having this conversation. He told her that if she contacted me again, if she showed up at my apartment again, if she reached out to Josie again, they would need to involve legal counsel. She started crying and said she couldn't believe her own father was threatening her with lawyers over expressing love. He said this wasn't about love, it was about respect and boundaries and accepting reality. The call ended with Ren hanging up on him. He apologized for having to take such a hard line with his daughter, but said her behavior left them no choice. I thanked him and told him I appreciated everything he and his wife were doing to support me through this mess. The next Sunday morning, I drove to the cemetery for the first time since Ren's confession 3 weeks earlier. I'd avoided coming because I wasn't sure what to say to Celia about the whole situation. The grass was wet with dew, and the air smelled like fall leaves and fresh dirt. I walked the familiar path to her grave and stood there looking at her name carved into the headstone. I pulled some weeds that had grown around the edges and straightened the small bouquet of flowers her parents must have left recently. Then I sat down on the grass and started talking. I told her I was sorry her sister turned out to be so different from who we all thought she was. I said I hoped she would understand why I had to set these boundaries, why I couldn't let Ren rewrite our history together into something it never was. I talked about how uncomfortable it made me to know that someone had been watching our marriage and waiting for it to end. That every supportive gesture during her illness came with hidden expectations I never agreed to. I told her about Josie and how different this relationship felt, how it was built on honesty instead of secret hopes. I said I thought she would have liked Josie if they'd had the chance to meet. I sat there for almost an hour just talking to the headstone like she could hear me, feeling the morning sun warm my back through my jacket. Standing up to leave, I realized something that shifted the weight I'd been carrying around for months. Moving forward with Josie didn't erase what Celia and I had together. It didn't make those 7 years less real or less important. If anything, it honored what we built by showing I learned how to love deeply, and I was still capable of doing it again. Celia taught me what a good partnership looked like, what it meant to support someone through hard times, what real love felt like when it wasn't hidden or manipulative. Those lessons didn't die with her. The guilt I'd been carrying about dating started to lift as I understood that grief and new love could exist in the same space without canceling each other out. I could miss Celia and still build something meaningful with Josie. I could honor my past while also creating a future. Walking back to my car, I felt lighter than I had in weeks. 3 weeks later, Celia's mother called to invite me to Thanksgiving dinner. She said they wanted to maintain our relationship despite everything happening with Ren. They'd told Ren she was welcome to come too, but only if she could be civil and respectful. If she couldn't manage that, she should stay home. Her mother's voice was careful when she said this, like she was worried I might refuse to come because of the Ren situation. I told her I would love to be there and appreciated them wanting to include me. She sounded relieved and said they considered me family regardless of what happened with Ren. We talked for a few minutes about what dishes everyone would bring, and she asked if I wanted to invite Josie. I said Josie already had plans with her own family, but I appreciated the offer. After we hung up, I sat with the decision for a while, making sure I was attending for the right reasons and not out of obligation. I decided to go because Celia's parents had been nothing but supportive through this entire mess. They chose to believe me over their own daughter when it would have been easier to stay neutral or make excuses for Ren's behavior. They set clear boundaries with Ren to protect me, even though it caused them pain and family conflict. I didn't want Ren's actions to cost me the family connection I genuinely valued. When I told Josie about the invitation, she encouraged me to attend and said she was glad I had that support system. She made plans to spend Thanksgiving with her parents and brother so I wouldn't feel guilty about leaving her alone on the holiday. Her understanding about the whole situation made me appreciate her even more. Thanksgiving morning arrived cold and gray with the smell of coming snow in the air. I drove to Celia's parents' house with a pumpkin pie on the passenger seat and my stomach tight with nerves about whether Ren would show up. Her car wasn't in the driveway when I pulled up, which gave me some relief. Her mother answered the door and hugged me tight, holding on a few seconds longer than usual. She said Ren had called that morning to say she wouldn't be coming, which was probably for the best given all the tension. I helped carry dishes from the kitchen to the dining room while her father carved the turkey. The house smelled like roasted vegetables and fresh bread, all the familiar sense of holidays I'd spent here with Celia. We sat down to eat around 2 in the afternoon, just the 3 of us at a table that usually held 6 or 7 people. The empty chairs made the absence feel heavier. Her father said grace and mentioned Celia by name, thanking her for bringing me into their family. I had to blink back tears and focus on my plate for a minute to get control of my emotions. The day felt bittersweet in ways I hadn't fully expected. I missed Celia so much during the family traditions we used to share together, the way she would always burn the rolls because she got distracted talking, how she insisted on making her grandmother's stuffing recipe even though nobody else really liked it. Every room held memories of holidays past when she was alive and healthy and laughing, but I also felt supported by her parents' continued acceptance of me, their determination to keep me in their lives even when it complicated their relationship with Ren. We talked about safe topics during dinner, work and weather and plans for the winter. Nobody mentioned Ren directly, but her absence sat at the table with us like an uninvited guest. After we finished eating, her mother brought out old photo albums, and we looked at pictures of Celia as a kid, stories I'd heard before but didn't mind hearing again. Her mother pulled me aside while her father was loading the dishwasher. We stood in the hallway near the stairs and she kept her voice low. She said she'd been thinking a lot about how she missed the signs of Ren's feelings all these years. She wondered if there were moments she should have noticed, things she should have said or done differently. I told her this wasn't her fault, that Ren deliberately hid her feelings from everyone. She said she still felt like she should have protected me from this uncomfortable situation. She apologized for not seeing what was happening and for not stepping in sooner. I told her she and her husband had been amazing through this whole thing, that their support meant everything to me. She squeezed my hand and said they considered me family regardless of what happened with Ren, that losing Celia didn't mean losing me too. We stood there for a minute, not saying anything, just existing in the shared grief of missing someone we both loved. December arrived with early darkness and cold that settled into my bones. The second anniversary of Celia's death fell on a Tuesday. I took the day off work and spent the morning at the cemetery. The ground was frozen and hard under my feet as I walked to her grave. I brought fresh flowers and stood there thinking about how much had changed in 2 years. I'd gone from barely surviving each day to building a life that felt worth living again. I'd found Josie and started something real. I'd set boundaries with Ren and protected my own healing. I'd learned that moving forward didn't mean forgetting. I talked to Celia about all of it, updating her on my life like I used to do when she was alive. In the evening, I had dinner with her parents at their house. We ate quietly and shared memories and acknowledged the weight of the day together. Later that night, I met Josie at her apartment, and we sat on her couch drinking tea and talking about nothing important. She didn't try to make the day less sad or pretend it wasn't hard. She just sat with me in it, present and patient. I felt like I was honoring both my past and my future, holding space for grief and new love at the same time. A few days later, Josie and I sat at her kitchen table after dinner and had a conversation we'd been dancing around for weeks. She asked where I saw our relationship going and whether I was ready to get more serious. I was honest about my fears of losing someone again, about waking up some mornings still scared that loving someone meant setting myself up for more grief. I told her I worried about how Celia's memory fit into a long-term relationship, whether it was fair to ask someone to share space with a past that significant. She listened without interrupting, and then shared her own fears about being compared to someone I loved so deeply, about whether she could ever measure up to a relationship that ended in tragedy instead of falling apart naturally. She said she sometimes wondered if I would always wish she was more like Celia, or if I was settling because I couldn't have what I really wanted. We sat there being vulnerable with each other in ways that felt scary but necessary. We talked for over an hour about all the complicated feelings that came with building something new on top of grief and loss. I told her she wasn't competing with Celia's memory, and I wasn't trying to replace what I lost. She said she understood that intellectually, but sometimes her emotions didn't keep up with her logic. I said I got that completely because I dealt with the same thing. We decided to keep moving forward together, acknowledging that our relationship would always exist alongside my history with Celia, rather than replacing it. She said she wasn't scared of loving someone with a complicated past, that everyone came with baggage and mine just happened to be more visible than most. Her confidence about the whole thing helped ease some of my worry. We made plans for the holidays and talked about introducing her to more of my friends in the new year. Sitting there holding her hand across the table, I felt grateful for her patience and her willingness to build something real, even when it wasn't simple or easy. The Christmas card arrived in mid-December with a red envelope that made my stomach drop before I even opened it. Inside was a generic winter scene with snowflakes and pine trees, but Ren had written a long note in the margins and across the back. She said she hoped I was doing well and that the holidays would give me time to think about what really mattered. She said she understood I needed space, but she wanted me to know she was still there, still waiting for me to come to my senses. She said she believed deep down I knew we belonged together, and that eventually I would see past my confusion. She signed it with love and drew a small heart next to her name. I put the card in a folder with the other documented contact attempts and brought it to my next therapy session with Gareth. He read it carefully and asked how I felt receiving it. I said it made me angry that she was still pushing after everything her parents said, but also worried that her behavior might get worse instead of better. Gareth asked if I thought the card crossed the line into harassment territory. I said it felt manipulative but not threatening, more like she was trying to keep herself in my thoughts during the holidays. We talked about whether this level of contact warranted legal action, like a cease and desist letter or restraining order. Gareth pointed out that courts generally want to see a pattern of escalating or threatening behavior before granting protective orders. A single holiday card, even with an inappropriate message, probably wouldn't meet that threshold. He asked if I felt unsafe or if Ren had made any direct threats. I said no, she hadn't threatened me. She just refused to accept my boundaries. Gareth suggested we create a clear plan for what steps I would take if her contact increased in frequency or intensity. We mapped out a progression starting with another firm written boundary statement, then involving Celia's parents more directly, then consulting with a lawyer about legal options, and finally filing for a restraining order if necessary. Having the plan written down made me feel more in control, even though I hoped I would never need to use it. Gareth said the fact that Ren's contact had been relatively infrequent over the past few months was actually a good sign, suggesting she might be starting to accept reality, even if she wasn't ready to admit it yet. Josie came over to my apartment on New Year's Eve with takeout food and a bottle of champagne. We decided to skip the crowded parties and bars in favor of a quiet night together. We ate dinner on my couch and watched the countdown shows on television, talking during the commercial breaks about what we wanted from the coming year. I told her I wanted to stop letting the Ren situation take up so much space in our relationship. I said I was tired of our conversations being dominated by my dead wife's sister and her inappropriate feelings. I wanted to introduce Josie to more of my friends and bring her to more parts of my life instead of keeping everything separate because of family drama. She said she wanted that too, and appreciated that I was thinking about our future instead of just managing the present crisis. We talked about taking a trip together in the spring, and maybe looking at getting a dog since we both worked from home part of the time. She asked if I was ready to meet her parents, and I said yes, which made her smile. When midnight came, we kissed and toasted to new beginnings, and I felt hopeful in a way I hadn't felt in months. The Ren situation wasn't resolved, but it also wasn't controlling my entire life anymore. I was building something real with Josie, and that mattered more than managing someone else's unhealthy obsession. In January, I started volunteering with a grief support group that Gareth recommended. The group met every Thursday evening at a community center and focused specifically on people who had lost spouses. I was nervous the first night because I hadn't really talked about Celia's death with anyone except Gareth and Celia's family in over a year. The facilitator introduced me to the group, and I shared my basic story. Married 7 years, lost my wife to cancer, been widowed for almost 3 years now. Several people nodded like they understood exactly what I meant. After the formal meeting ended, people hung around drinking coffee and talking in smaller groups. A woman in her 60s told me about losing her husband to a heart attack and how she was learning to cook for one person after 40 years of marriage. A younger guy around my age talked about his wife dying in a car accident and how angry he still felt 2 years later. I listened mostly and shared a little bit about my own experience. It felt good to be around people who understood grief from the inside instead of trying to help from the outside. The facilitator asked if I would be willing to help mentor newly widowed people who were just starting their grief journey. She said my perspective as someone further along in the process could be valuable for people still in the early shock stages. I agreed to think about it, and by the next meeting I decided to say yes. They paired me with a man in his 40s whose wife had died 3 months earlier from breast cancer. We met for coffee before the group meetings, and I mostly just listened while he talked about how impossible everything felt. I remembered being exactly where he was, and it helped me see how far I had actually come in my own healing. Through the grief support work, I heard stories from other people dealing with complicated family situations during mourning. One woman talked about her late husband's mother blaming her for not catching his illness sooner. Another man shared about his in-laws cutting off contact completely after the funeral because seeing him reminded them too much of their daughter. I realized that messy family dynamics around grief were more common than I thought. During one meeting, a man named Richard talked about a situation that sounded eerily similar to mine. His late wife's brother had developed romantic feelings and made a move about a year after the funeral. Richard said he had to completely cut off contact with that side of the family because the brother wouldn't accept boundaries. Hearing him describe the confusion and betrayal he felt when someone recontextualized their grief support as romantic interest made me feel less alone. After the meeting, I talked to Richard privately, and we compared notes on how we handled the situations. He said he wished he had documented everything from the beginning like I was doing, because by the time he realized he needed legal protection, he had already deleted most of the inappropriate messages. His experience validated that my instinct to save everything was the right call, even when it felt paranoid. In February, I got an email from Ren that was longer and more detailed than her previous messages. She said she had started seeing a therapist to work through her feelings and wanted to apologize for how she handled things. She said her therapist helped her understand that her approach was inappropriate and that she should have respected my boundaries from the start. She said she was working on accepting that we wouldn't be together and learning to move on with her life. The email felt carefully written, like she had drafted it multiple times or maybe even workshopped it with her therapist. But something about the tone bothered me. She kept using phrases like "for now" and "at this time" that suggested she still thought things might change eventually. She ended the email by saying she hoped we could rebuild our friendship once she finished processing everything in therapy. I showed the email to Josie, and she immediately picked up on the same thing I noticed. The apology felt more like an opening for renewed contact than genuine accountability. Josie said it read like Ren was trying to use therapy as proof she had changed, so I would let her back into my life. I sat with the email for a few days before responding. I wanted to acknowledge that getting help was a positive step without encouraging her to think we would ever have the relationship she wanted. I wrote back a brief message thanking her for going to therapy and saying I was glad she was getting professional support. I added that I needed to maintain distance regardless of her progress in treatment, and that I wasn't interested in rebuilding a friendship. I kept the tone neutral and factual, trying not to give her anything to interpret as hope or cruelty. After I sent it, I felt relieved to have responded clearly without opening a door for more conversation. A few weeks later, Celia's mother called to tell me that Ren had started dating someone new. She said they met through mutual friends and had been seeing each other for about a month. Her tone was cautiously optimistic, like she hoped this meant Ren was finally moving on from her fixation on me. I told her I hoped so too, but privately I felt less confident. I had learned enough about unhealthy attachment patterns to know that starting a new relationship didn't automatically fix the underlying issues. Ren might date this person while still holding on to her feelings for me, or she might use the new relationship to try to make me jealous. I didn't say any of this to Celia's mother because she sounded so hopeful, and I didn't want to be negative. But I also didn't let my guard down or assume the problem was solved. I told Josie about the new development, and she had a similar reaction. She said she was glad Ren was trying to move forward, but that we should stay alert for any signs that this was just another manipulation tactic. We agreed to maintain our boundaries and documentation system regardless of Ren's relationship status. Josie and I celebrated our 1-year anniversary in March with a weekend trip to the coast. We rented a small cottage near the beach and spent 3 days walking along the water, eating at local restaurants and talking about our future without the constant shadow of family drama. It felt like a significant milestone given everything we had navigated together in our first year. Most new relationships didn't have to deal with a dead wife's obsessed sister or complicated grief dynamics. Josie handled all of it with more patience and grace than I could have reasonably expected. On our last night at the cottage, we sat on the deck watching the sunset, and I told her I loved her for the first time. She said she loved me too, and had been waiting for me to feel ready to say it. We talked about what the next year might look like, and whether we wanted to think about moving in together eventually. Neither of us was in a rush, but it felt good to acknowledge that we were building towards something permanent. I told her about my fears of losing someone again, and how loving her meant being brave enough to risk that pain. She said she understood, and that she was scared too, but thought we were worth the risk. Driving home from the coast, I felt more settled in my life than I had in years. I would always miss Celia and carry that loss with me, but I was also genuinely happy with Josie and excited about our future together. In April, I flew across the country to introduce Josie to my parents. They lived in a retirement community in Arizona, and I only saw them a few times a year. I had told them about Josie over the phone, but this was their first time meeting her in person. My mother hugged Josie at the airport, and my father shook her hand warmly. Over dinner that first night, my parents asked Josie questions about her work and her family and her hobbies, getting to know her as a person rather than just as my new girlfriend. The next day, my mother pulled out old photo albums and showed Josie pictures from my childhood and my wedding to Celia. I tensed up when the wedding photos appeared, worried that this would be awkward or painful for Josie. But she looked through them, genuinely interested, asking questions about the venue and the dress and what Celia was like. My mother talked about Celia fondly, sharing memories of holidays we spent together and how much she loved having her as a daughter-in-law. She said Celia would have wanted me to find love again and be happy. My father added that they could see I was happy with Josie, and that was all they wanted for me. The whole conversation felt honoring rather than uncomfortable, like my parents were making space for both my past and my present. Josie handled it all gracefully, neither trying to compete with Celia's memory nor acting threatened by it. After we left, my parents told me privately that they really liked Josie and were happy to see me building a new life. My mother said Josie seemed like someone who understood that loving me meant accepting all the parts of my history. Back home, I had my regular therapy session with Gareth, and we talked about how the Ren situation, while painful, had actually taught me important lessons. I learned how to recognize manipulation and trust my own perceptions, even when someone was telling me a different story. I learned how to set firm boundaries and maintain them, even when people pushed back or made me feel guilty. I learned the difference between genuine support and someone positioning themselves for their own agenda. Gareth pointed out that I had grown significantly in my ability to advocate for myself and protect my relationships. He said the fact that I documented everything, involved appropriate people, and created clear plans showed real emotional maturity. I told him I wished I had learned these lessons some other way, but I also recognized that going through the crisis made me stronger and more self-aware. We talked about how trauma and difficulty can be teachers even when we don't want them to be. I realized I was more confident in my own judgment now, and less likely to ignore red flags or explain away concerning behavior. The whole experience with Ren had been horrible, but it also forced me to develop skills and boundaries that would serve me for the rest of my life. A random Tuesday in April found me driving to the cemetery without any particular reason beyond wanting to talk to Celia. I parked in the familiar spot and walked to her grave carrying no flowers or special offering, just myself and the need to share what my life had become. I sat on the grass beside her headstone and started talking like I used to during those early Sunday visits, except now the words came easier and the pain felt different. I told her about Josie and how we'd been together for over a year now, how she made me laugh and how she never tried to erase Celia's memory, but instead made room for both past and present. I talked about the grief support group where I volunteered and how helping newly widowed people navigate their loss had taught me that healing doesn't mean forgetting. I mentioned her parents and how they'd been incredible through everything with Ren, how they still were included me in family events and treated me like a son even though their daughter was gone. I explained that I was learning to carry my love for Celia forward into a new life instead of leaving it behind at her grave, that moving on didn't mean she mattered less, but that I mattered enough to keep living. The conversation felt one-sided but also peaceful, like I was updating an old friend rather than mourning a lost wife, and I realized that shift meant I was truly healing. May brought an invitation from Celia's parents for a family barbecue at their house, except this time they specifically asked me to bring Josie along. The request felt significant because it meant they were ready to integrate my new relationship into the family dynamic rather than keeping those worlds separate. Josie seemed nervous when I told her about the invitation, but she agreed immediately, saying she wanted to know the people who had been so important to me. We drove to the suburb on a Saturday afternoon with a store-bought dessert and uncertain expectations about how the day would unfold. Celia's mother greeted us at the door with warm hugs for both of us, and her father shook Josie's hand with genuine friendliness that put her at ease. The backyard was set up with tables and a grill, and several aunts and uncles were already there mingling and drinking beer. What made the whole day easier was Ren's complete absence, which her mother mentioned briefly by saying Ren had other plans and leaving it at that. Without that tension hovering over everything, people relaxed and the conversation flowed naturally, instead of everyone walking on eggshells. Josie talked with Celia's cousins about normal things like work and hobbies, and I helped Celia's father with the grill like I'd done at dozens of family gatherings before. The day felt comfortable in a way I hadn't expected, like we were building something new while honoring what came before. After we ate, Celia's mother brought out old photo albums and started showing them to Josie on the patio table. I tensed for a moment, wondering if this would be awkward, but her mother's intention seemed genuinely kind rather than testing or comparing. She pointed out pictures of Celia as a kid with missing teeth and messy hair, told stories about family vacations and childhood adventures that made Celia feel real and dimensional, rather than like a saint on a pedestal. Josie leaned in close and asked thoughtful questions about what Celia was like growing up, what her interests were, what made her laugh. She seemed genuinely interested in knowing about the woman who had shaped so much of my life, and I felt moved by how she engaged with my history, instead of feeling threatened by it. Celia's mother talked about how Celia would have wanted me to find happiness again, how she never would have wanted me to spend my life alone and grieving. The whole conversation felt like permission and acceptance, like Celia's mother was deliberately making space for both my past with her daughter and my future with Josie. I sat there listening to them talk and realized how rare and precious it was to have people who loved me enough to hold complexity, to honor what was lost while celebrating what was found. Driving home later with Josie beside me in the passenger seat, I felt something settle into place that had been uncertain for months. The barbecue had proven that I could maintain my connection to Celia's family while building a life with Josie, that these relationships didn't have to compete, but could coexist and even strengthen each other. I wasn't the same person I'd been when Celia was alive because grief and loss had changed me fundamentally, but I'd become someone who could carry that love forward while also opening myself to new happiness. The complications with Ren had been painful and difficult, but they'd also forced me to develop boundaries and self-awareness that made me a better partner to Josie. I glanced over at her and she smiled back, completely unaware of the realization happening in my head but present for it anyway. This felt like the best possible outcome given everything that had happened. Not perfect or simple, but real and honest, and built on a foundation of people choosing to support each other through hard things. I reached over and took Josie's hand, grateful for her patience and her willingness to walk into my complicated life, and she squeezed back without needing any explanation for the gesture.